Do you guys remember those safety speeches you got if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, or heck, I don't know what happened in the 70s, but maybe it was in the 70s too, where you'd have a school assembly and somebody would come in and they'd be really nice. Their eyebrows would go up in the middle and they'd be like, all right, kids, you can trust me. And here's some things you got to look out for. And you remember them telling you about the candy van? I assume that's where the meme came from, but they'd be like, some people, like they've been trying to lure the kids into vans with candy, and then those kids get taken away. So like, look out for strangers, stranger danger. They point, you yell about the thing. And there were always instructions about like if somebody pulls up and they're in a van with tinted windows and they got candy in there and you're like, I'm supposed to be waiting for my mom. And they're like, oh, your mom told me to come get you. Like, don't do it. Only if you really literally hear from your mom, she'll get in there. I remember all of that stuff. I still think about it to this day. Apparently it got through the armor for me. I feel like we're running into a similar situation in Matthew chapter 24 with the way this outline is unfolding in this Olivet discourse about how time is going to unfold. The disciples, understandably, they just want to know what the deal is. Jesus is telling them he's going to die and he's going to be brought back to life and that they're going to be on their own. They have all this responsibility. And it does feel like they're a little bit on broken glass, kind of tiptoeing around because they don't want to ask stupid questions. But at the same time, they're like, that's kind of a lot. You said the future of the kingdom, the whole enterprise is going to be on our shoulders. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we're idiots. So if you could just give us a few more details, that'd be really helpful. And understandably, some of the details we want the most are, give us the timeline and give us what to look for. And that's what we're getting here in Matthew chapter 24. And so far what we got is Jesus saying there's going to be a bunch of stuff that happens that just always happens. Just keep on driving right on down the road. You're going to see things, but that's just how history is. Those are birth pains. Those are hints that there's something happening here with the world and that this is all going somewhere. But they're not indications that you need to rush to the hospital right this second or anything. It's just how things go. And then you've got the stuff we talked about for the last week or so with the abomination of desolation and how that picks up on the motif that spans both testaments regarding the profaning of the temple. This idea of the holy presence of God being contrasted with the wicked, selfish, violent activity of humankind and world kingdom stuff. And there have been profanings in the past. There are profanings in view now. There are going to be profanings in the future. And somehow, maybe even a little atemporally, all of that points to where this is headed in regards to the disciples' question. And that is, of course, the culminating moment of everything being reckoned and dealt with and solved in the future. And that is the arrival of the Son of Man, the arrival of Jesus. And that's what we're getting to as we get toward verses, I don't know, where are we at here, 21, 22, 23-ish in Matthew chapter 24. But that stranger danger stuff from earlier on, it reminds me of this because you got a deal here where Jesus is like, all right, one of the things I do specifically want to warn you guys about is that people are going to pull up in metaphorical spiritual vans with all the windows taped over, and they're going to pull up with metaphorical spiritual candy, and they're going to be like, oh, actually, I'm Jesus, or I know where Jesus is. Just get into my creeper van, and I'll just take you right over there to where the Messiah is. He actually came back already. He's out there in the desert. And you can just climb into the back here next to my shovels and duct tape and quicklime, and we'll just go out and just see how he's doing. It'll be great. He's super excited to see you. He told me to come get you, actually. Jesus knows that kind of clownery is going to go on, and so he's trying to give his disciples a heads up not to fall for that. If you guys just are so eager to have me come back that the first time somebody's like, oh, you guys are excited to have Jesus come back? Well, yeah, I'm him. But so you just come with me, then you guys are going to get in trouble. You're going to screw everything up. And so we get this language starting in verse 21 that ties into a word that you have probably heard before if you've been around Christianity at all. It's so loaded that I'm not even going to use it yet. I'm just going to read this. Here's how it goes. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. So this is all coming on the heels of whatever abomination of desolation Jesus has in view that is the fulfillment of what was spoken of in the prophet Daniel, like we talked about the last few weeks. And part of the reason that I don't think he could just mean the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, a few decades after he spoke these words, is because he says it's like the worst thing that ever happened, and that it'll never be equaled again. And I don't know, I got some history books or whatever, and I Googled some different things. I was looking it up, and it looks like there's a lot of real bad stuff in history, things getting bombed and blown up and exploded, and people enslaved, genocide, really bad things. I just don't know if that's the worst thing that's ever happened. And so it seems like probably we're looking further down the road than just a few decades here. Whatever the case, the magic word that I alluded to a moment ago is tribulation. It looks like what Jesus is referencing here is that on the heels of the abomination that causes desolation, there's going to be a difficult time, sometimes nicknamed by Christians a tribulation. And maybe that's what we're talking about here, some specified chunk of time that's going to come where it's going to be really difficult for Christians. Some people do the mental math on the book of Revelation, and they're like, oh, yeah, that tribulation, it's going to be this many years, like 7 years. And you got this reference in 1 Thessalonians toward the end. I'm not even going to pretend like I know the chapter. And some Christians look at a verse like that indicates that there's going to be some kind of taking away of the Christians before all of that time of great suffering happens. And they're like, all right, so tribulation is going to occur after this abomination that causes desolation, but the Christians will be removed from it all. A word that's been popular for the last 130, 140 years in certain circles of Christianity is raptured. Christians will be taken up out of that before this window of time Jesus is talking about is going to happen. Then other Christians look at it and they're like, if you look between the lines right here in this part of Revelation, looks more like it's going to be like in the middle of that suffering. So Christians will suffer along with everybody else in this difficult winter, this difficult time that's being described here after the abomination that causes desolation. They'll be there for part of it, but not for all of it. And there are other people who are like, no, I kind of look at it and it looks like maybe that's going to happen after the tribulation. Christians will have to suffer through all of that, and it's going to be real, real tough. And then there are other people who look at the Bible and they're like, I'm not sure you're reading that thing from 1 Thessalonians, right? I'm not necessarily sure that your conception of a rapture even necessarily all makes sense. But we're not trying to figure all of that stuff out because it's complicated and it takes us in a whole bunch of different directions. I just want to acknowledge that people think it. What we're getting in this text right here is Jesus indicating that something that is singularly bad and difficult when compared with all of the vast badness and difficultness of history is going to happen in this moment that he is describing, this moment that immediately precedes the arrival of the Son of Man. Because remember, our outline here in Matthew 24 is that history is going to history. There's going to be some difficult stuff, but it's no sure sign of anything. Keep going. Then we have this abomination of desolation. And then somehow that points us toward the reckoning, the coming of the Son of Man, the return of the Son of Man. But right in that little pocket between the abomination of desolation and the return of the Son of Man, there's going to be some confusion and some imposters, which will compound the difficulty of whenever this time occurs. That's what I can glean from this text right here in Matthew chapter 24, not trying to sort out everything else. Verse 22, if those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, so these are people who God chose to redeem, those days will be shortened. And again, that phrase would be something that people would factor in as they try to determine whether this future tribulation, if that's how you read it, will be something that Christians would be around for none of it, some of it, all of it. It all factors into the read there, and I will let you do with that what you need to do with that. And the reason I don't want to linger is because verse 23 gets us into the actual actionable point here for anybody who's reading this or is a follower of Jesus, and that is this. It says, at that time, verse 23, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there he is, don't believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. We're going to keep unpacking the Olivet Discourse all the way up to the part in verses 26, 27, and 28 where Jesus is like, hey, I know there's a lot of debate about this, but when the Son of Man comes back, when I come back, you're going to know. You're not going to miss it. We're going to make a bunch more headway on that tomorrow. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you to those of you who I just saw, like a couple of you jumped in and signed up to support the podcast at patreon.com/TMBH podcast. You are cool. That does not go unnoticed. I really appreciate the encouragement. Okay, now that's it. More tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.